What's up, guys? Welcome back. Continuing on here with my transmissions from the park for you. Felt like it'd be nice to get out and just kind of, enjoy a green space and kind of be away from everybody and talk to you a bit and share with you a bit. So here we are. So today's video is going to be a video on the kind of unique hell, the unique suffering that psychedelics users go through. And this will be useful for a couple different segments of people. So one would be anybody out there who is thinking about doing psychedelics but hasn't really taken that path up yet. You might want to know this before you get involved, just in terms of understanding what maybe some of the risks are that aren't at the extreme acute end of, say, schizophrenia or something like that, but are more pervasive, more common. What are the kind of, the shadow aspects or the negatives to taking psychedelics? So I'll be addressing that with this, and I'll also be addressing, for those of us that have taken them and and gone through that experience, I want to give voice to what might be a kind of unique form of suffering that some of us have gone through as a result of taking psychedelics. Not in any way to defame or take away from psychedelics. I'm very much pro-psychedelic for a lot of people, but I think it's important to just kind of give voice, because this kind of starts to put context to why I started this channel, why I started on my path of personal development, and give some context to what I'm doing as a coach, and really helps you to understand maybe, how you can start to dislodge some of this suffering from your own being and move past it. So let's go ahead and get into that in just a moment. But before we do, I wanted to just say really quickly that if you liked any of my content on the coronavirus, on dealing with current anxiety of self-isolation, self-quarantine, or depression, or anything like that, please let me know, because so far I've been making content like that and it's got no clicks. It's got no traction on social at all. People don't seem to really give a shit. So I'm kind of moving on with my content back into the stuff that I was going to be talking about before the coronavirus stuff broke out. But if you want me to address more immediate mental health concerns, like how to stay sane while you're in self-quarantine, how to avoid being depressed as the world around us changes, how to manage your own anxiety levels so that you can stay strong and centered for those around you, anything like that, please let me know, whether it's a comment or, a DM or whatever, even just a thumbs up on the video, something to let me know that that's a valuable topic for you, and I'll make more of that kind of content. So let's go ahead and dive into today's topic. So when you take any sort of classical psychedelic, so by classical psychedelic, I mean something like, say psilocybin or LSD or DMT or anything like that, one of the very common, natural, normal things that happens is that you will tend to start to see more connections in the world around you. You'll start to make associations between things you hadn't thought were really connected or correlated. And you'll start to really understand holistically all of life around you a little more in depth, with a little more clarity, and things become almost absurdly, comically strange, funny, and at the same time very clear, very obvious, that all the different ways that things can connect and things could possibly be rendered. So you start to become aware of all the various ways that life could go, that it hasn't gone or isn't going or could potentially go. And so when this happens, usually at first this is kind of like more in the form of amusement. A lot of times people kind of laugh and just get these really absurd, funny ideas in their head, or it can turn into just awe, just pure, unadulterated awe at all the various possibilities that are available to us in life. That could be that what is possible for oneself, what's possible for humanity as a whole, what's possible for, this beautiful gift of life that we've been given. And so one of the things that happens through doing that is that you become intimately, and even sometimes painfully aware of how good life could be. And you become, aware of how good you feel and how long perhaps it's been since you felt that good, and how immensely pleasurable it is to be alive, and what a gift it is to be alive, and all the amazing different ways that you could arrange a life experience to be better, funner, funnier, weirder, stranger, newer, more optimal, different in all kinds of different ways. And so part of what happens is that because of that, one of the byproducts of that is that you become very, very aware that the world is operating in a very suboptimal way. And, I mean, this is not news. Obviously, in 2020, with the internet, with all the shit we know, that's not news to any of us, right? But when you are on psychedelics, your emotions get involved, your heart gets involved, the depth of your being gets involved, and you start to really register how fucked up some of the very most obvious, taken for granted, assumed to be true things are in this world or in our country, depending on where you live. And you start to become aware, painfully aware, like I said, that it could be so much better than it is. And that awareness, in 3D, in depth, in vivid technicolor, can start to become something that really haunts you, that really tugs at your heartstrings, that really makes you want to fucking change things, right? It can really just engage you to want to see the world become a better place. And so that is one way that, maybe during the trip, you're having that kind of experience. It's super common to have it if you do. That's one way that you can start to suffer later. I wouldn't say typically I don't suffer during the trip, or I haven't really suffered during the trip when I've had these kinds of revelations. Typically, it's more like a profound conversation I'll have with myself or with my friends, depending on the context that I'm in, where we'll be talking about how we could make the world a better place. We'll be talking about, what needs healing, what needs transforming, what needs improving, how things could shift. But it's usually more in the spirit of hopefulness, in the spirit of optimism, in the spirit of possibility. Because again, psychedelics really awaken your brain to all the various possibilities. But what I found is that after the fact, kind of moving forward in life, the next day, the next week, the next month, there will tend to be a bit of a, it could develop into a psychic sore spot, an emotional sore spot, where you're aware of how fucked up the world is, and that it could be also not just aware of how fucked up it is, because that's one thing to just simply be stuck with the awareness of what's wrong, but to be aware of how much better it can be and how right it could be really can start to haunt you. And paralleling that initial point here, my second point is that if you take psychedelics, you might become more aware of how shitty you feel in your default state much of the time. So interestingly enough, part of what psychedelics do is they cause the brain to stop operating in the default mode network. So when we are operating in our day-to-day and we're in our normal lives, we typically are operating in what's called the default mode network, which is a kind of brain circuit, a neural circuit that is just there to take you through your basic functioning. So it's not about higher functioning, it's not about new functioning, it's not about learning new things, it's not about any sort of extreme of adaptive capability, it's just kind of running the program of the day-to-day. And typically when we're in the default mode network, we don't have very low lows and we don't have very high highs. But there can tend to be a lot of kind of pain or suffering or emotional kind of turmoil in the background that we're kind of filtering out just to continue on with our day-to-day. So what happens when you take psychedelics is that your default mode network switches off, or at least maybe doesn't switch off completely, but dials back significantly, and your brain starts to crosstalk in all these new ways. You start to get all kinds of new ideas, information, like I said, all this new awareness of possibility. So part of what happens is that you become aware of how shitty you've been feeling in your day-to-day life. And, by contrast, when you're on the psychedelic, because it mimics serotonin in the brain, you feel very happy. You feel very full of peace, of joy, of energy, of enthusiasm, of curiosity, it's a very childlike, curious, wide open, playful, spirited, passionate, fluid kind of experience, right? And so typically people tend to feel so much more joyful and it goes in waves. I mean, psychedelics it's a very fluid experience. It shape shifts a lot, but people tend to feel a lot more happiness when they're on the psychedelic. And then you come down off the psychedelic and you go back to your life and you go back to the default mode network. And all of a sudden, now you have this awareness of how good you could feel, and that's just a basic level experience. I mean, if you end up having a mystical experience of any sort where you literally feel the love of the universe, where you literally feel God's love pulsing through you, where you touch some form of deep peace, deep, profound, lasting peace, or deep wisdom, or profound inspiration, or just a complete sense of engagement in your being at the deepest level with life in a way that is like profoundly loving and passionate. Like that kind of experience is entirely possible if you take psychedelics. And if you end up there and you end up in some sort of peak experience, you merge into the heart of the light of God's love and become, temporarily enlightened and, speak with angels, and you've been healed of your past traumas, and, God teaches you the lessons of the universe, and you're sitting in this profound wisdom and oneness with all of life. Coming back down from something like that, back to your default mode network, can really, really highlight that you've been feeling shitty and living at a very low, basic, uncomfortable, boring, dull, lifeless kind of level. And so that over time can really start to eat at you, because now you know the difference, right? So if all you've ever eaten your entire life is McDonald's, and you're malnourished, and you're out of shape, and you're overweight, and your body and your organs aren't functioning properly because they're getting the wrong sort of food, and you're missing whole, sets of nutrients, whole, vitamins and minerals that don't exist in that food. And then for the first time, you're giving a meal that is deeply, deeply nutritious. And in this deeply nutritious meal, not only is it super nutritious, but it's delicious in the most nuanced, complex, layered, fascinating. You just want to keep eating it because the flavors are so new and interesting and different and beautiful and, engaging. If you have a meal like that and it like left you, like gave you chills to your body, and you felt so good after you ate it that you felt high, and then you go back to eating McDonald's day in and day out, you're going to feel that much worse about the McDonald's, right? So it's the same thing here with a psychedelic experience. When you have that kind of high level mental, emotional, and spiritual nutrition, then you go back to your regular day-to-day kind of cognitive processing. For a lot of people, that can be a letdown. It can be a bummer. It's what Ram Dass called, I think and believe here now, it might have been a different book, being kicked out of heaven, where you basically touch the experience of being in the heavenly for a while, and then you have to leave. You have to come down off the drug. And, knowing that it's possible in your body and for you to experience the heavenly, to experience bliss, to experience peace, to experience absolute wisdom and absolute connection with life, and then to not have that can really, really, really start to eat at you. And over time can create a sense of hell and a sense of disappointment in life because you know better. You actually know better. And the third form that I want to speak about here really does parallel the first two that I just described to you. And that is the unique suffering that comes from touching a new skill or a new level or a new capability inside of yourself, knowing it's there, but then not knowing how to be in touch or in that place more often. And this is really what drove me to start Mind Keys and start sharing all this information with you guys and start doing what I'm doing here, is that not only would I see for myself, but I would see for friends of mine too, that we would have these experiences where we would legitimately have a breakthrough and touch some new part of ourselves, whether that was a new level of, creativity, whether that was a new skill or a new ability, like a new level up at, say, playing an instrument, for example, or dancing, for example, or whether that was, a soft skill of, say, maybe really developing sharpened, honed sense of compassion and kindness, even when people really put the pressure on you, or maybe that was really developed in terms of, it could be any ability. I've even seen people develop like psychic abilities where they are, just much more mentally perceptive and sensitive and able to really read things that are happening at a very subtle level. And this becomes a new feature of who you are and how you are. This becomes a new part of your personality, which is, it's an amazing thing to really witness yourself growing by leaps and bounds and leveling up. And it's deeply fulfilling to feel yourself grow in that way and to have a breakthrough in terms of some skill, some knowledge, some perception, some ability, and then to have it go away later. And so it can really haunt you to know, oh, I had a breakthrough in terms of my own character development, or I had a breakthrough in terms of my own emotional development, I had a breakthrough in terms of forgiving the world, I had a breakthrough in terms of standing in my own dignity, I had a breakthrough in terms of standing in my own light and giving love to people no matter how they treat me. I had a breakthrough in terms of my ability to have fun. I had ability, et cetera, right? I'm kind of ranting here, but you get the point. To have these beautiful, beautiful breakthroughs in our capabilities, and then to have them go away, not only when we come down, but maybe they last after you come down, but they go away over time, and you kind of slide back to an old way of being that isn't quite as high functioning, that isn't quite as beautiful, that isn't quite as aligned and healthy and clear. That can be super frustrating. That can be super, super demoralizing. And it can really hurt. It can really hurt to know that you have better inside of you, that you have more to offer and more to do and more to give, but you can't tap into it. You can't get to it. It's there. You've experienced it. You know firsthand. You're capable, but you can't fucking get to it. And this is really what drove me to start engaging in this work. I think that it's very possible that our potential as human beings is vastly, vastly more than what most of us understand and perceive. Certainly if you read most of the mystics from any really world tradition, they will say the same thing. And certainly from what I've seen in my own friends and my own, people I've gone to festivals with, people I have, done spiritual retreats with, people that I know that I've seen grow and take psychedelics over the years, I've certainly seen firsthand that it is very, very possible to have massive kind of jumps and breakthroughs in capability and skill. But the question is, what's it going to take to make it stick? Why does it go away? And how do we get it so that when we have these breakthroughs, so let's say that you have a breakthrough in your ability to be kind to others. This is a common one I see a lot. People, when they're on the medicine, super kind, super friendly, super benevolent, funny, flexible, and then, they come down off the medicine and a week later they are their same negative, pessimistic, dark, judgmental, crappy selves. I've seen a lot of that. That's just one example. So how would a person like that remain in that high level of kindness, in that high level of flexibility and humor and wit and a kind of higher level, higher vibrational way of being day in and day out? And that's kind of what that question is, what's caused me to pursue what I've been studying, what I've been learning, and now what I'm teaching. Another example of that would be, what happens when we get a transmission from whatever, let's call it our higher selves. You could call it the universe. You could call it, the muse. You could call it whatever you want to call it. But let's say you get a transmission, and that transmission is, I need to start doing yoga every day and taking better care of my body. Or I need to start eating better. Or I need to, et cetera, or I should really pursue that thing I've been afraid of pursuing. And you're very clearly getting this message. And then so often what I would see is people get these kinds of messages, and when they're on the medicine, they're like, I'm with it, I'm doing it. And then they come down off the medicine, they go back in the default mode network, and they don't do it. Or they do it for like a couple days, and that goes away. And this can become a source of kind of self-judgment and, maybe at an extreme level, even like self-hatred, self-anger, and kind of really cause a bit of a rift inside of you with yourself because, You know what you need to do, yet you're not doing it. You have the guidance. You've had the divine intuition. You've had the divine guidance. You've had spirit telling you, okay, this is what you need to do, and yet you don't do it, right? And that can really eat away at you. And so what I've been working on and what I'm after here is developing a skill set and a way of approaching, integrating these kinds of insights into behavior level change. That to me is the holy grail here. In psychology and in different kind of mind-related fields, there are a lot of different kind of assumptions and different modes and models and ways of looking at human experience and human change. There's this popular buzzword in the psychedelic work community right now of integration work. I'll make another video on that, on what my thoughts are on that. But the long and the short of it are that I think that where the rubber meets the road is behavioral change. And what we see a lot in a lot of different psychological fields is that lasting behavioral change is actually very hard to achieve. And so, first of all, if you're somebody who's been struggling with any of the problems that I've just mentioned here, please understand that you're not alone. Please also understand that not everyone feels this way. Not everyone gets insights or inspirations or touches some beautiful part of themselves and has hope from that and then wants to do something about it. So if that's you, please know that that's not everybody who does psychedelics. But also, if you're struggling to turn that into lasting personal transformation, you wouldn't be alone in that. That would be very common. And this is why one of the reasons I love hypnosis is that it has this beautiful, elegant way of softening the structures of our identity and our ego and our personality and our ways of being, and making them just fluid enough to change, then retrain the unconscious mind, the habitual part of the brain, to operate in this new way that we want it to operate. So when we learn the skill of how to soften these aspects of ourselves and open up, become fluid, it's very much literally taking the brain off the default mode network without taking psychedelics. You get back into that fluid state, and then you can retrain specifically what it is that you want to embody, what it is you want to retrain into yourself, that perhaps you got in some sort of a transmission or an insight that you want to live into and create as a better experience of your life. So that is possible, and that is what the work I do with people, that is the work that I'm engaged in myself and that I'm learning more and more about all the time and that I want to communicate to you. And I would just leave you with this, what the question in my mind is always, what becomes possible, for your life if you are able to take these highest learnings and these highest wisdoms for yourself, self-directed, it's your own inner guidance, and plug them in and turn them into lasting change. What changes for your life? How does your life get better? In what ways would you experience life if you weren't holding back? If you weren't narrowing yourself down to this default mode network that you've always been operating inside of, right? How, if you broke out of that and you redefine what your new default mode is and it's better, how would your life be, right? And by extension from that question, if the world, or more people in the world, more accurately, did that, what would happen in the world? If more people were aligning to their own higher selves, their own highest wisdom, and then understanding, because this is the big mystery. The mystery is how to make the change. How do we make the changes? There are a lot of different theories and a lot of different stuff on that. In my experience, a lot of it doesn't work. But in my experience, hypnosis actually works very beautifully. And maybe it won't work for everyone. Maybe it's just for certain people who resonate with this approach. But what happens in the world if we're all accessing, or more of us are accessing, our higher wisdom, plugging that into lasting change in ourselves, transforming ourselves, therefore transforming our behavior and our relationship to life around us? What happens then? I'm going to offer you the idea that I don't really know. I don't think anyone does. But I do think that it would be incredibly beautiful. I think it's something worth exploring, something worth engaging in. And I think that the inverse is actually very sad. I think that the inverse of not following our higher selves, of ignoring our higher selves, of being given guidance and kind of just giving up on it, being hopeless about it, being pessimistic about it, and not turning it into lasting change in the world is robbing ourselves of the best life experience that we could have, and it's robbing the world of what it could be. So that's food for thought for now. This is a bigger conversation that stretches out into all kinds of other areas. I know my videos tend to be long anyway, so I'm going to wrap it up here, and I hope you guys are well. Take care.